Nothing in this world is separate, but we have learned to see it that way. And that way of seeing is beginning to cost us. We live as if things are divided, human and nature, progress and preservation, economy and ecology. We draw lines between what is ours and what is not. We build systems that separate us from the world around us. And over time, this separation begins to feel normal. And yet, something about it feels incomplete. Because the more we divide, the more distant everything becomes. And what if this distance is not real? What if it is something we have learned to see? Among the Lakota people, there is a phrase, Mitákuye Oyás'iŋ, all my relations. It is often translated simply, but its meaning is far deeper. It does not only refer to human relationships, it includes everything, animals, birds, rivers, trees. Life is not divided, it is extended. The world is not made of separate parts, it is made of relationships. Everything exists in connection with everything else, not symbolically, but fundamentally. For generations, this was not something to explain. It was simply understood. The river was not a resource, it was a relative. The forest was not property, it was a living system you were part of. Animals were not separate from human life. They were part of the same circle. To exist was to participate in that circle, not as an owner, but as a member. But something changed, not suddenly, but gradually. The world became organized around separation, human versus nature, development versus environment. We began to speak of natural resources as if they existed for us, as if they were external, as if they had no connection to who we are. And with that shift, something important was lost, a sense of consequence. Because when something feels separate, its impact feels distant. Forests are cut, rivers are polluted, the air warms, ice melts, species disappear at a rate that no longer feels natural. Entire ecosystems begin to collapse, and still it feels like something happening somewhere else. Not here, not to us, but the effects are not distant. They return. In the air we breathe, in the water we drink, in the food we depend on, in the heat that lingers longer each year, in the storms that arrive stronger than before. Separation does not remove connection, it only hides it. Modern science is beginning to describe this in its own way. Ecosystems are not isolated, they are networks. Each part affects the whole. Remove one element, and the balance shifts. Sometimes slowly, sometimes all at once, but always in relation. Human life is not outside this system, it is within it. What affects the land affects us. What affects the water affects us. What affects the air affects us, not metaphorically, but directly. Mitákuye Oyás'iŋ understood this without needing explanation. It begins from a different place, not with separation, but with relationship. All my relations, which means that nothing exists alone. Not the tree, not the river, not the human. This changes how we understand responsibility. Because if everything is connected, then nothing is external. There is no out there, only a system you are part of. This is where everything quietly changes. Because care no longer needs to be taught, it becomes instinctive. You do not protect something because it is useful. You protect it because it is related to you. You do not wait for collapse to respond. You respond because you recognize the connection. This does not require complexity, it requires perception. To see differently, to recognize that the world is not made of objects, but of relationships. When that recognition returns, distance disappears, and with it, indifference begins to fade, because it becomes harder to harm what you feel connected to. harder to ignore what you recognize as part of yourself. Perhaps the problem is not that we do not care, but that we have learned to see the world as separate. And when separation becomes normal, destruction becomes easier to justify. Mitákuye Oyás'iŋ offers a different way, not as a solution, but as a reminder that life was never divided, only perceived that way. And maybe the shift does not begin with systems or policies, but with something quieter. A change in how we see to begin seeing the river not as water, but as relation, the forest not as resource, but as connection, the world not as something around us, but something we are within. Because when the world becomes relation, care becomes natural, not forced, not instructed, but understood. And when that happens, protection is no longer a duty, it is simply a response. This is Mitákuye Oyás'iŋ, all my relations, and nothing was ever separate. This is land and life. These are the echoes of the earth.